You might remember my previous video where I talked about the iPad Pro in Apple's recent Let Loose event. If you don't remember, that's fine. If you're new here, welcome. But while the surrounding hype, right, it was pretty intense, with Apple themselves even calling this the biggest launch since the iPad, the original iPad. But there was one device that really caught my eye in that event, which was the M2 iPad Air, particularly the new 13-inch model. So before you go out and splurge on the M4 iPad Pro, hear me out, because I think the M2 iPad Air could be the dark horse, Unless Apple does something that I don't think they ever done or will ever do. Let me explain. As I mentioned in that previous video, the Let Loose event was full of exciting numbers, huge claims that this launch was the biggest since, the original iPad launch. And whilst I think that this is a little bit exaggerated, they might be right about one thing, which is the iPad Air. With the 11 inches starting at $599, I can see this being a massive popular, iPad, not just for students, but for the corporate sector. And for people, I'm seriously considering that iPad to be my long-term iPad, because Apple's marketing saying, you gotta get that one. Hear me out. Back in the day, I used to purchase iPads for executives in the place I used to work. And even though they'd be asking me for, the iPad Pro, I'd always be finding it really difficult to justify it, because I knew they would just, they just want to use Office apps and run emails on it, right? Well, I say that, but I think it will depend on how good that display is, because it is only a 60 Hz display, and even saying that kind of hurts. I personally really enjoyed the M1 iPad Pro when it first came out, but after the dust settled, the M1 iPad Air, when that came out, was the one that I was always reaching for. That form factor and the current software that we've got on iPads makes a lot of sense, because whilst the iPad Pro has, is an incredible piece of tech, I just wasn't really able to push it for my workflow. With the M2 iPad Pro that I've got here, I'm still just using it as almost my jumped up, Netflix device. With this M2 chip on the iPad Air though, skipping the Pro is starting to become even more appealing for the right use case, of course, right? Apple will always want you to believe that you need the Pro. Their marketing, always pushes for this missing out narrative that if you don't go for the most expensive option, you're not gonna get the most out of stuff. That's true for the iPhone, the Macs. But here's the thing that's bugging me a little bit still, which is the lack of promotion. It's a tiny feature. If you pay attention to Twitter and things like that, people say that no one cares about it. I think that's a bit of a miss. But let me know, is the lack of promotion for you a deal breaker in 2024? Look, I get it, companies need to make money, so cutting things and making different levels of products make a lot of sense from a profitability perspective, and Apple are the experts on this. But where's the line between, healthy margins and frustrating customers? In today's market, 120 Hz shouldn't feel like a luxury item reserved for the Pro models. Anyway, don't want this to become a rant. I'm excited about the iPads, but not having a 120 Hz display at this day and age does feel like a cheap shot a little bit. I'm also slightly annoyed that the new iPad Air comes with that anti-reflective coating. I could be wrong on the specs here. I'm not sure if it's the same anti-reflective coating that they're selling on the upgraded iPad Pro, but whether you like it or not, you're getting it. At least I didn't see an option not to have it. So I was wrong, by the way. I had to fact check myself here. The iPad Air does indeed have an anti-reflective coating, but that's not the same thing as the nano texture display glass option that we get on the Pro. That nano texture display on the Pro refers to the type of glass that's available when you get the 1 TB option, whereas the reflective coating is available on all models. Sorry, that was my bad. But what that does mean is that the 60 Hz LCD display on the iPad Air could still be quite reflective. I'll be testing that in a few days, but yeah, it's a concern of mine. Luckily, if that's the case, we still have something like Paperlike, right, which I will be using. Paperlike, by the way, they're not sponsoring this video. They did sponsor my previous video, but they do offer a protector that will deliver, a similar result as that nano texture display from an anti-reflective perspective. But unlike Apple's nano texture glass, Paperlike actually has a haptic feedback that you get that gives you that feel that you're writing or drawing on paper. So if you want to replicate that paper feel Paperlike is the way to go. And of course, if you want that extra protection anyway, if you're clumsy like me and you're dropping your stuff all the time, I definitely recommend Paperlike, and that's the first thing I'll be doing on my iPads as soon as I get it. Going back to what I said at the beginning, remember when I said that unless Apple does something they've never done before? Here's what I meant. If Apple were to completely revamp iPadOS 18, let's just imagine, right, making it a true multitasking powerhouse, then maybe, just maybe, the iPad Pro would hold more weight. I know we have split view and stage manager, which to be fair, is getting better already, but it's not as flexible as something like, I've got to compare it, but it's not as flexible as something like Samsung DeX. And there's nothing wrong with that. Apple just never really crossed that boundary where, someone may choose to buy an iPad instead of a MacBook. And vice versa, right? MacBooks don't have touchscreen for that same reason. They don't want to cannibalize the sales in those two different categories, so I understand the business side of it, right? I'm not criticizing that, but I'd love for the iPad OS to give us something that makes the iPad more capable. It's a shame to have so much power on a tablet and not be able to really push it in the way, at least for me, in the way that I want. The way I see it right now is, the iPad is a fantastic device if the iPad OS apps that you use are satisfying your needs. For artists, designers who are always on something like Procreate, Shaper 3D, or even using animation apps, lots of creative work on a single app, without having to multitask a lot. Yeah, the iPad can be the main tool in your toolkit and you'll be happy with it. But for people who want to truly work on several apps at the same time and be efficient doing that without trying to reach for my laptop all the time, I still think the iPad OS, current version anyway, doesn't make the experience fluid enough. It's not impossible, and I've shown here in my previous videos, and there's plenty of people out there. I've seen that there's friends that I've got on YouTube here that do use iPad almost like completely as their main device. That's entirely possible to multitask on the iPad. I'm not saying that it isn't. And I'm also not suggesting that we get like Mac OS on the iPad. I've heard that argument as well. It'd be nice, but I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying for my use case at least, I'd love to be able to organize the apps in the way that works for me and to run more than just two apps at the same time, flexibly on a big screen without wasting a lot of space on the screen like Stage Manager does. It's just not flexible enough. Apple kind of wants you to do things in their own way. Anyway, I can dream, right? But I'd love to hear what you think as well. So let me know in the comments if I'm, dreaming and that will never happen, or if you agree and you do think that multitasking should just be a thing within Apple, the Apple ecosystem, because I personally think in both iPad and iPhone cases we're missing out on that. When it comes to the M2 chip on this iPad, I gotta say we shouldn't underestimate how good that is, right? That is huge news. The M1 was already insane on the iPad Air. I mean, that's the iPad I've got at home, with my family, and having the M2 and a new GPU as well, right, will make the iPad Air even more capable, which is why at this price point is going to be really difficult to beat. And I'm not even considering the upgrades on the audio, the camera placement, which is a welcome change, finally right in the middle with center stage as well. Yeah, even as I'm saying this now, I'm like, why do I need the Pro again? Do I really need to go spend that much more to get the Pro when most of the stuff that I personally need, the M2 iPad Air will be perfectly capable to run. And the fact that Apple run that part of the event in a school setting wasn't a coincidence, right? They really want to impress students, and ignoring the usual 50% faster than this and 3 times faster than before, I have no doubt that the iPad Air will be extremely capable. So showing some really cool games and mentioning AI for the first time ever didn't feel like they were exaggerating for once. That definitely felt believable, because I have the M2 iPad Pro here. That chip is no joke. There's a lot I don't particularly like or agree with, in Apple's approach to things, but when it comes to performance, right, the sheer performance that you got on MacBooks and the iPad with this chip, I'm not suggesting, by the way, that video editors and music producers should ditch their Macs and buy iPads, but as someone who wants to learn those new skills and, without breaking the bank, the iPad Air is gonna be a fantastic, budget-friendly device to do that with. And it was nice to see 64 gig storage option going as well. I'm really impressed. I think this iPad will sell a lot. When you combine this renewed power in the M2, the affordability factor of the M2 iPad Air, and a refreshed set of features, it makes the Air a very attractive option for a lot of people, and not just students. That might be my next go-to iPad as well. The M4 iPad Pro will definitely have all the bells and whistles, but for most people, the Air will deliver more than just enough performance at a fraction of the cost, right? So before you jump on the Pro bandwagon, I can't tell you what to do, but I can recommend that you have a serious look at the M2 iPad Air, because it might just be the perfect iPad for you. See you soon, hopefully with the new iPads in hand next time you see me. Ciao.